You want to hear some great stuff from Mark Byron Dallas. You would like to understand, we are going to explain accents, and is it important for you to even change dynamics of linguistics? Everything will be good for you. Don't go away. It's a great video. Do you guys want to change your accent, modify it? And if you can, should you do it? Today, we're going to do a deep dive into accents with Mark Byron Dallas, who will possibly, and I think he will, reveal enlightening, surprising things that'll make you rethink what you think you know about accents and the English language. Subscribe to this channel, and let's go. Hi, this is English Musings. I'm Athar, and this is your YouTube podcast for all things English. I explore the one language used all over the world in every context. I dive into the nuances from its historical evolution, its countless varieties, its ever-changing nature, and of course its ability to connect to ideas, peoples, and cultures all over the world. Today, I'm going to be talking with Mark Byron Dallas, a veteran English accent and dialect coach and trainer who's been refining his craft for the last 20 years. He's worked with stage professionals and actors, voice actors, and stage actors. And Mark, it's great to have you. But before you introduce yourself, I just want to say that engaging online over the past several years with many, many people who work on stage professionally and use their voice professionally, as well as thousands of learners, English learners or new users of the language, the idea of accent has always come up. They'll ask, how can I change this? How can I do what I need to do? Before you get into that, why don't you introduce yourself, tell us about who you are, and we'll address those burning questions.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Athar. Thanks for having me on. I work primarily as a dialect coach, usually with actors, but also with professionals from other fields who want greater control over how they sound. So with actors, the work is about helping them inhabit characters authentically. But then with other professionals, it's often about clarity, confidence, and also having more choice and confidence in how they communicate. So most of my coaching is one-to-one with clients throughout the world, and sometimes I work in person with people as well.
All right, that's great. Thanks a lot for that introduction. It gives people a little bit of context here on your authority and expertise on this. How did you, let's go into your backstory a little bit on this. How did you get involved with this? Why did this particular issue fascinate you? What is it about accents and this whole idea that got you in it?
That's a good question. So this obsession, I think I could call it, is from growing up in the second biggest city in the United Kingdom, Birmingham, right? So I grew up surrounded with a wide range of regional accents, not just the Brummie accent, as it's called, but also my dad was from Glasgow in Scotland. So, I grew up with several accents around me, and also people from places like India, Pakistan, all over the world, right? And since I left Birmingham when I was an adult, after I left school, I went to college in places like Ipswich in Suffolk. I used to go and visit family in Essex. I lived in Bristol for a number of years. And then I moved to get a job where I ended up working at the BBC in London. And after that, I met my wife and we both emigrated to Canada. So now I live in Toronto. And so basically I picked up different accents and worked with people that have different accents in different fields and taught English to people from around the world as well. So throughout that time period, I've been exposed to a lot of different ways of speaking the English language.
Oh, wow. I don't think you could get greater exposure to a broader number of accents than being in places like Toronto. I mean, I've been there many times.
Exactly.
Anyway, that's great. On this issue of accents, and we'll get into those questions that we talked about, burning questions. How can I do this? How can I change that? And that's what you do. But what is an accent? I mean, a lot of people think they know what it is, and they they confuse it with pronunciation and certain forms of clarity. What is an accent?
That's a great question. A lot of people confuse the term accent with dialect, but they're actually kind of different because really an accent is the way that the words and phrases and sentences come out of your mouth, as opposed to a dialect, which is really the choice of words that you have that is determined by what you select in your head. So basically, when you're speaking a language or when you're writing a language, when you're making a choice of words, your vocabulary, that is the dialect. And then the accent is how you put that into the words that come out of your mouth so that people can hear them. That is your accent.
It's the how. So you're saying it's not the what, it's the how.
It's kind of the way you form things into sounds,
Yeah.
right? So it's basically, you could think of it this way. A dialect is the words and the grammar that you choose in order to communicate in a language, whereas the accent is the sounds that you use in order to make those words come alive and be understood by somebody at the receiving end.
And how do we typically acquire our own accent? I mean, what are the sort of factors that make up who we are as an accent? And correct me if I'm wrong, because one of the things I think in our conversations before, you may have said is that accent is kind of like a signature, something unique to you, and or in some ways can be possibly unique even within certain communities within a home. People speak slightly differently. It's that unique fingerprint. But how do we acquire that thing that we call an accent?
Right. So, yeah, exactly. So the way that we acquire accents is, primarily when it's like a story, right? Even before we're born, we're actually listening. So this is the thing, we're listening to people speaking even before. Now, this is people that can hear, right? So the majority of us, we can hear the sounds of language. So in that case, we can actually hear the voices, the different tones, and so on, the different intonations of the languages being spoken around us when we're still inside our mother's womb, right? So we start to get used to the sounds of those accents and languages around us even before we're actually born. And then, of course, when we're born, we start to attach the images. We know what our mom looks like. We know what your dad looks like, the family around you, and you start to associate those sounds with the people. And so, of course, you start to emulate the sounds around you. You start to speak. We, as babies, we repeat things. We make sounds. We play with sounds. And that is when we start to acquire what you might call a native phonetic inventory, right? So basically the building blocks of what we use in order to form words and put them together. So we start to do that even before we go to school, right? So then when you start to have friends and, kids your own age and so on, that is when you really start to form your accent, because usually kids don't pick up just the sounds that their parents are using, but you pick them up from your peers. So that's when you really start setting the foundation of your accent as a kid. And then as you get older, you start to learn more things. Like you start to learn how people react to the way that you speak. And that's when you start to learn about accents. You start to learn how people associate things with those types of accents. All kinds of socio-political things come into that, and as you come into adulthood, and maybe you're learning other languages as well, you're starting to pick up sounds that are in those languages. The more you're exposed to more of those sounds in different languages as you get older, the bigger your native phonetic inventory becomes. So that's kind of a very long roundabout way of saying we acquire our accents
I,
in
I
any given language.
I really love the way you sort of painted the trajectory of that process, because it's, as you said, it starts before birth, but there's biology involved. We are using all those facilities and senses that we have available even before we're born to sort of start processing. And then afterwards, there's this exposure, this experiential exposure that we have in interacting with our peers. And as we grow and learn, that is also very formative. I don't mind like kind of nerding out on some of this stuff because I know you love this. Okay. So,
Hey, I'm a nerd too. So, we're peas out of the same pod. Yeah.
So as we're trying to understand what it is, this whole idea of accents, we come across people who want to modify and change it for professional reasons. They want to change it for a role, a part that you're preparing them for. Who should change their accent? Who can? And are there points at which it becomes challenging, difficult?
Who should change their accent? Well, the whole idea of changing your accent is a very sticky one. It's a very tricky, sticky question because, like, what does it mean, first of all, to change your accent? Because, like, most people throughout their lives, their accents will change at least a little bit as they get older. Mine certainly has, because of, like I said, I've lived in different cities in the United Kingdom, and I've also immigrated, and now I've been surrounded by people that speak a different accent from me, mainly in the city that I've lived in for the last couple of decades. So then quite often people's accents will change depending on to whom they're speaking. And, that's affected by your environment as well. However, what we're talking about here is the question, when it comes to somebody who is not an actor, who wants to sound a certain way, they really have to think about why that is. Because with an actor, it's pretty obvious, right? It's pretty obvious why they are learning how to speak a certain way, because they have to pretend or they have to act as that person in that role, whether it's on stage or film or TV or whatever, or an audiobook.
For
but
a relatively short period of their life.
for a relatively short period of time. It could be for a rehearsal, right, for a few minutes. It could be for, a number of months, right, depending on what it is that they're doing. But it's still a relatively short time. But if you're talking about a professional who wants to sound a certain way, pretty much in their role as a particular, whatever they're doing in their job, right? So whether it's sales or maybe they are, working in an office environment, and they want to get ahead and they need to get that promotion and all of these kinds of things.
For a job,
the question,
like you were saying, yeah,
exactly. For whatever job it is, you have to really think about the real answer to why you want to make some alterations there. The reason you need to think very carefully about this is because it's going to take you a lot of effort, a lot of time. There's going to be it's going to, and of course, time is money, right? So it's going to cost you money, most likely, if you're going to be consulting somebody who's going to help you through that process and point things out to you, where the gaps are between where you are right now and where you want to be in terms of how you sound. So you have to have that commitment. So before you even decide that you're going to be that committed, you're going to commit that time and effort and so on, you have to be certain about why you're doing that. And you have to be very clear to yourself and honest honest with yourself, because, it really is a case of a lot being a long-term commitment. So do you really want to put yourself through that? And, how much of it is because people are finding it hard? People are finding it hard to understand you the way you speak now. And it's a very valid reason to want to change how you sound. If people are constantly asking you, I'm sorry, can you repeat that? Or what did you say? Or they don't understand you, right?
So this may
And
be
that could
where
be caused by
sorry, but this may be where people are, like we said earlier, are confusing the idea of accent with issues of clarity and pronunciation, being able to articulate
yes.
certain specific phonemes, right?
Exactly. So that is on a very fundamental level. And if you're considering like, okay, people are having real trouble understanding what I'm saying, that makes sense. So that's like on a fundamental basis, there may be some things that you may need to adjust in order to, and some things you need to realize that, and the reasons why people are getting confused when you're speaking to them. However, if we take it to a different level in terms of, okay, I speak the language fluently, whatever language this is, I speak it fluently, and I speak it with an accent from this particular place, or that is influenced by my first language that I spoke growing up. But, I want to sound like I'm from this city where my first language is not the main language that's being spoken here. That is when you really need to think about what it is you're expecting from yourself, right? Who are you trying to fool? Right? Because if you're an actor doing this, that makes perfect sense, because you need to, trick people into thinking that your character is actually from that place.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, people are going to be taken out of the story, and that's that. However, as a professional, they say, "Oh, I want to sound like you, Athar."
Yeah.
Well, it's like, well, why do you want to say that? What is it you think that particular accent will give you, as opposed to what you have now? And there are many other factors that come into that.
I think you made a really good point when we were speaking earlier that people who are very experienced in a language or relatively new to language are all users. But when I speak to people who are intermediate and beginning, and I have to dispel some of these notions, I refer to them as learners. But the point is, I tend to have to I find myself dispelling a lot of these notions, trying to clear things up and to say, you're not talking about accent, or I understand what you want to do, but that's not a good idea, because you need to focus more on your grammar, your grammatical accuracy, your pronunciation, your vocabulary, so that you can improve your fluency. You want to sound like have a greater command of the language, which is different than simply sounding like Brad Pitt or, I don't want to say it, like Donald Trump. Just because you're a native speaker doesn't mean you're a good speaker. So there's that. But let's go back to your professionals that you work with. Now, you break it down to these very specific components and these tools that you use to help train them. And one of those tools that you mentioned was these lexical sets from John Wells.
Right.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit? And also, when someone comes to you and says, I want to achieve a certain accent for a certain part, how close do they get? And can they get there?
Well, oh yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yes, they can. It might take different people different lengths of time, and a different number of sessions, a different number of hours, but you can definitely move somebody a lot closer to their target accent, especially if they have a good ear. Especially musical people, musicians and so on are really good at it. But even if you don't have a good ear, what I mean by that is that even though you can hear very well, even if you can't sing in tune or whatever, you can still learn an accent, right? Actors are very good at being mimics, and being a mimic is very important, even though learning an accent isn't just about mimicking, right? It's not just about copying, but being able to observe things. This is where actors are an entirely different breed of person, because part of their job is to observe, watch, empathize, and then reproduce what it is that they have remembered and soaked in like a sponge. So, in order to learn a new way of speaking, and in order to be able to replicate an accent authentically, they have to embody that, right? They have to notice all of the layers that are implicit in what makes an accent, right? So they have to learn everything from the very details, like it's zooming into the kind of pixels, if you like, the tiny building blocks of what we call phones and phonemes, right? The speech sounds, all the way up on a different level to how words are connected to each other in different environments. When I say environments, I mean like, different types of words next to each other at different speeds and so on. And zooming out from that and seeing like, what is the intonation patterns? What is the musicality over an entire phrase or sentence? And also how through that they can emote, right? How can they express an emotion or a feeling through those words as well, and at the same time bring that into their body, right? So that's why actors can do it so well. Now, some actors better than others, but your question was like, what are some of the tools there? And I did just mention about different layers of an accent, right? So there's so many different layers, and one of those layers within there, or one of the features, one of the structural elements within accents in the English language is something that doesn't get spoken much about. So this is where I'm going to get a little bit nerdy. Okay.
Oh, we're good with nerdy. We can do nerdy.
Okay, great. So here we go. And you mentioned,
you guys, everybody get comfortable, because this is really interesting. I started looking into what you were talking about recently, and I didn't quite understand it as I was looking through this, whether there are 24 or 27 sets, and also what does that mean? Like if you started looking at one set, and maybe like going into one of these sets would be really useful. But I would love to understand that.
Yeah, I will do. I'll set this up for you though. So basically, here's one of the most fascinating things about accents, right? That you see, linguists. So basically, a linguist is a language scientist, right? I'm not a linguist, but I studied a lot about it.
You play one on
TV. Me. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I play one. Maybe in my next role. So, linguists don't actually organize letters and sounds alphabetically, right? They actually organize them by their physical placement in the mouth. Okay, so they're thought of in a different way by linguists and voice coaches. So they're not thinking A, B, C, how you say the O, right? It's like, no, there's this framework that we often call lexical sets, or some actors call it the kit set, because usually the first one on the list is kit. And like I said, it is developed by this English linguist called John C. Wells. And so instead of saying like the O vowel, they might say, the lot set, right? Or the lot syllable, or that, or the thought vowel, or the strut vowel, right? Because the letter O, that could be the letter O in the word SOM, which is some, the strut vowel, right? But it's not necessarily pronounced some. It could be pronounced sum, or it could be pronounced sum, right? So that's three different ways that I pronounce that
word. Do you want some milk? Do you want some milk? Some or some?
Yeah, or some. Do you want some? Do you want some water, right?
Yeah.
Or do you want some water? Or do you want some water? If you from Delco, or you want some water if you're from Glasgow, right? So some, right? That O in that word some, that is how we would refer to it as the strut vowel, right? So strut is the key word, the head word, if you like, that John chose for those words that have that sound in it. Not that particular actual vowel, but in that structure of English language words. So it would include words like strut, it would include some, it would include the name Douglas, right? Even though it's spelled Doug. It would include the word thorough in an English accent in England, right? Thorough. But in an American accent, it's more likely that first syllable in thorough would be in a different set. It would probably be in the nurse set. So thorough, right? So this is the other thing about lexical sets is that words can be kind of slippy in different accents and fit into different ones. Another example of another lexical set would be, like I mentioned before, the kit set. So the kit set, as you might assume, includes the word kit, K-I-T. But it can also include words like synonym, right? Because the first syllable of synonym, S-Y-N, that has the kit vowel in it, it. And also the last syllable of that word, synonym, right? Because the first and last syllables of that word, synonym, those are stressed. The first one is primary stress because it's high, spit, nim. The last one is secondary stress because it's low, but it's still a full vowel. Whereas the middle syllable in that word is just an unstressed vowel, right? So those are what lexical sets are. And as you mentioned, rightly so, Athar, that there are 27 of them, but most accents don't have that many. It's just that there are some of those sets that might be merged with the same vowel in some accents, and some of them might be split in other accents.
I think
so.
I mean, the whole concept can be a little bit, even for me right now, as I'm just coming across it, it's a little overwhelming for even people who are, okay, you're saying here's a group of sounds that go within one set. It's not defined by vowels, because the vowels may come and go. And depending on one's dialect, certain words will come within that group and sometimes they would be out of that group in another accent, in another dialect, right? And so that's why it can be really... So how do you...
It can be weird, yeah.
How do you actually ingrain this in somebody who's coming across this for the first time? Do you just look at their potential script and their words and say, okay, you want to say this in this particular accent? We're going to go through each of those words. I mean, how do you do that? In a practical sense?
It really depends because every client that comes to me is different. So different in the amount of time that they want to invest in whatever it is. So if it's like a rehearsal, it could be 30 minutes to an hour. But it could also be that somebody has booked me for 6 hours of coaching for a play that they have a role in, and they need to sound like this particular person from a particular place. So it really, how I approach that could be very different. If it's like a very short session, then I'll just refer to things and say, the strut vowel there, just move your tongue a little bit further back for the strut vowel. And so then they might just kind of like associate, in some, that's the strut vowel. Okay, right? So I'll just kind of like impose it. I'll just use these terms because I will never say the letter O in that word. No, because it's going to be different from the letter O in lot or the letter O in north, right? So I'll just use these terms to refer to it. And if they say, well, what do you mean by that? Then I'll explain it a little bit more. But if, for example, this client is with me for several months and several sessions, what I might do is take their sides or their parts of the script where their words are. And then I can put it through a process of like categorizing so that all the words that contain that particular sound or that vowel and that accent in that set, I'll have them listed. And then in another set, I'll have those listed. And then what that allows us to do is drill. We'll be able to do a drill. So I could go through, like, for example, if their strut vowel is, if their tongue is in the wrong place for that accent. So, for example, they're not saying, they're saying strut instead of strut. Then it's like, okay, so let's go through this list of words. So it's strut, and they say strut. No. The tongue needs to be a little bit higher, and the lips are a little bit more protruding. Oh, strut. That's it. And now, so we go strut, monkey, summary. And go through like a list of these words that contain that particular syllable, right? Or that vowel category, right? So, some accents will have maybe 23, maybe 21 different sets, because like I say, some of them will be merged. Like, for example, foot and strut. And the accent I grew up with in Birmingham, there's no difference in the vowel between foot and strut, right? Summary, monkey, and all of those, it's the same vowel, because there's something called a split, right? So it's called the foot strut split, which you will hear in the south of England, because they believe that this happened, it started somewhere in London about 400 years ago, right? And it spread out of London, but it didn't get as far as the north of England. So there are many parts of England that it didn't even reach. So, but it did get taken across to America, English-speaking parts of America, and to Australia. So, in North America, you don't hear say people that I've got some monkeys, right? So some monkeys in the mud, right? No, they'd say some monkeys in the mud. So it would be different from foot and, as in football and so on. It's going to be a different vowel. That split exists in that accent, but doesn't exist in some others. So there are splits. And then when you have words where you've got, the same vowel in it, right? So, for example, you've got many accents these days have the same vowel in lot as there is in thought. I mean, obviously not in my accent, because my accent it's kind of a Southern English accent. So I say lot and thought. But here in Canada and half of the United States, it's lot and thought.
It's the same.
So that vowel, it's the same vowel. Even though we can think of them as two different categories, what I need to do is, if I'm teaching a Canadian actor how to sound like they're from the east of the United States, I need to make sure that their thought vowels are different from their lot vowels. Because in the eastern half of the United States, people would say, I thought about it, and there's a lot. There's a lot I thought about. It's different. They're different sets. They're different vowels. In the western half, and also in Canada, they're the same vowel. They're the same one. And then it's the same if I were teaching them a British accent, like in most of England, people are going to say lot and thought, right? They're totally different. So it really helps me to know how those categories work, and that certain words, certain syllables, and certain accents, they're going to be in different sets. Right. So
let's take a short little digression if we can.
Like you said, we've nerded out quite a lot already, and I don't want to burn people out on that one, because I could go on for hours about lexical sets and phonemes and consonants versus vowels, all those kinds of things. What a phoneme is, what a phone is, what's the difference. So
dive into who you are. What are one of your pet peeves here?
Okay, so I'm going to go with this one, which is there's no such thing as a bad accent linguistically. It doesn't really exist. I mean, there are accents that are harder for certain listeners to understand, right? But then that is also relative. It's relative to where that person is, what that person is familiar with, what that person is used to hearing, right? So that would make it so that, for example, I'll give you an example of English speakers. There are plenty of English speakers who would not be able to understand other English speakers. I've experienced this myself as well, right? So if you took somebody from, let's say, California, and then you dropped them into deepest, darkest Newcastle upon Tyne in the northeast of England, I can guarantee you that they're going to have some challenges. Right? Don't even need to go there. They could go to London. There's going to be some people there. They're going to have real trouble understanding. And yet both people speak English as their first language. So it is all about familiarity with that sound system, because that's what an accent is. It's a system of sounds. And so, every accent is a fully functional system. So what people usually mean when they say, oh, I've got a bad accent, or that person's got a bad accent, it just means it's unfamiliar or it's socially marked in some other way. So for example, the accent I grew up with as a kid, that is often considered a terrible accent by many people around the UK outside of that region. And that's because of something called accent bias. Accent bias is when you've got people that feel a certain way toward a particular accent because they associate something else with it. And it could be a positive association or a negative association. And so, of course, that is something I grew up with as a kid with, seeing on television, people with a Birmingham accent were usually portrayed by actors who were not from Birmingham, but they were putting on some kind of form of a West Midlands accent in order to make that character appear stupid, right? So, and this has been a trend ever since the late 1940s, all the way up to fairly recently when the TV show Peaky Blinders came out, when all of that kind of like decreased, when it's like suddenly you've got characters who are, okay, so sure, they're criminals. But, suddenly you've got, suddenly Birmingham is put on the map accent-wise as something that's kind of cool and dangerous. So this is accent bias. So no such thing as a bad accent. Whenever somebody says that, oh, that particular accent is ugly, that's their opinion. And again, it's a certain bias. Everybody has their own biases based upon their own experiences and also the way that society has exposed them to certain beliefs, whether they're true or not. So one of the most important parts of my work is helping people separate accent from assumptions about things like intelligence, competence, credibility. And these are things that are always with us, those biases.
I didn't bring this up when we were talking about the confusion between accent and pronunciation. But inherent within that confusion was exactly this idea that you just talked about with accent bias. I can very confidently say that some of the people that I spoke with who are acquiring English as their second language have a perception that they will sound smarter, more intelligent, and it is their feeling. They said this. This is not something I've said. They said, "Oh, I feel that I'm gonna come across better if I speak in that way." And I would ask them, "Why? Why do you think that?" He said, "Oh, because I just think it would be better." But when they really get down to it, it was this issue of perception, what they thought about themselves versus what they and the way they speak. I make it a point, and I don't want to get on a high horse here, but I would make it a point to tell people you need to accept yourself as you are first. You are a wonderful, beautiful person. You need to embrace your identity, your culture, and to the extent that you are acquiring language to help yourself communicate better to other people, go for it. Acquire new words. improve
Yeah.
your grammar, express yourself. But what they forget, and this is I want you to talk about this, are the varieties of English that exist, and not only within when we're comparing languages or ways we speak between the UK and United States, but within the United States, within England itself, the multiple accents that exist there, and this idea that there's one that sort of is national is kind of ridiculous, right? So
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I could talk about this for hours, you know. So,
we only have
but
about
I'm going to
15,
try
20
to
minutes.
keep it
Well, we can go for
right,
another
exactly. So
30.
I'm going to try to. I'll keep a lid on this, but you're straying closely to you're straying into territory that I'm quite happy to take you on a tour.
Yeah.
But um, yeah, exactly. The thing is, everybody is more aware of things that are right. You know, we're aware of things that are around us, close to us, and we're not quite as aware of the things that are further away, right? To put it very simplistically, which means that sometimes we can be really surprised by the variation that exists in places that we're not that familiar with, right? So, I mean, you know, this is why actors will come to me because they want to sound like they're from a particular part of the United States. Because, of course, there are so many different accents throughout the entire continent of America, not just America, North America, South America. I mean, just within the English speaking population, because when we talk about accents, we're not talking about a variety of speech of somebody that speaks a different language and is speaking English. We're talking about people who speak English even as their first language. And you touched upon this earlier. You mentioned something about even two people in the same household that could be twins will quite often sound different in the way they speak, and their accents could be slightly different too. So, of course, these changes happen like every they can happen every few miles depending on where you are. And it all comes down, I don't want to get too geeky about this, but it comes down to settlement patterns, right? So for example, in the continent of, I've got to be very careful how I talk about this. In the continent of North America, where there are people that are speaking English, right? Because we talk about North America and South America as two different continents. So, if we're talking about the English language as it is spoken in this continent, there's a lot more variation on the eastern side of this continent compared to how when you travel west. Then there's, you know, things are a little bit sparser. Things change a little. You have to travel a little bit further before you hear a difference in accent, and that's because of people's settlement patterns throughout the colonization of, you know, by European empires, like, you know, British Empire, Spanish Empire, Portuguese Empire, so on. The Dutch were kind of in there a little bit as well. So those European languages, they settled mainly on the East Coast and then kind of spread. More and more people came in and started to take up land as they went west. So it follows settlement patterns in that term. Now, if we're talking about a different language or different languages, for example, some of the languages that were spoken here hundreds of years, if not thousands of years before European languages even turned up on this continent, the settlement pattern is in a different direction. So if you're on the east coast of North America, you're not going to find that much variation in terms of languages like Mi'kmaq and a lot of languages that have now disappeared through various nefarious means of European colonization. But you're going to find that there's it's more spread out, just like English is on the west side. But if you go to the west continent, if you go to like Western Canada and Northwest United States, you're going to find so much variety, not just different accents in languages like um, oh god, I really painted myself into a corner now. But languages like Cree, which is kind of spread out across the north of the United States and Canada, But when you get to the West Coast into Vancouver and areas of British Columbia and so on, you're going to come across like different language families, not just different languages, but so many different language families because the
what do you mean?
settlement
What do you mean
patterns
by
have
that? Like families, language families there.
families.
Yeah.
Okay, so English is part of a language family called Indo-European.
Hmm.
Other members of this language family, we've got sisters like German, Dutch, uh, Swedish, Danish, Norwegian, yada yada. All the because English is a Germanic language, not German. It doesn't come from German, but it is sisters with those languages. But then we've got cousins like Spanish, Italian, and their sisters. Sisters with Spanish would be Catalan, Italian, or various dialects of what we call Italian, Romanian, French, and so on, right? So those are English's cousins. And then you can reach out even further back in the family. It's a huge family tree. You can go back and you can see distant cousins
So,
like
so you're saying that in the western part of
Russian,
Canada?
Ukrainian, yada, yada, yada. And then you go even
Yeah.
further. And
So,
so all of these languages are just one family tree,
yeah.
reaching back even to Hindi, Punjabi, all of those, right? So those are, yeah. And then if you go to the western half, like of North America, Canada, United States,
Hmm.
right? Alaska, there is like a region just within British Columbia where there are different language families. So the
Wow.
languages there are not even remote, they're not even related to each other because the settlement patterns that have come in different waves from Asia, thousands of years, like 20,000, 10,000 years before Europeans even went,
Right.
oh, you know what? I think there's land across the pond. Those are the settlement patterns is from that direction as opposed to the east where the Europeans came across. And you're going to find this in places where you've got different waves of settlement. So that's why there's so much variety just within those languages. And when it comes to English, it follows the settlement patterns of wherever the British Empire has settled at different times in different centuries. And that's why, you have so many different accents as well, is because change happens over time and distance.
Yeah.
So you're always going to have that. And one thing that you pointed out, Athar, which is very important, is that there's not really any such thing as one way, like the way or the best way to speak a language, right? We're often conditioned to think that that is the case.
Why?
So, for
Why do people
example,
think that? What I mean, I don't want to attribute it all to the king and queen of a few hundred years ago, but maybe that's part of it. I don't know. Why do we believe that that a language should be speaking? Even in the United States, that's the way, right? In terms of American English,
yeah,
we were told that American Standard English that is spoken somewhere in Kansas or somewhere in there is the way that every broadcaster should be speaking. You know,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean,
So
why do we
there's,
believe that?
yeah, that's a fantastic question. I'm very happy to answer it. I'm afraid it's not a very simple answer, but it really it comes down to a couple of things. One is kind of political, and one is practical. One is because from the early 20th century, there had to be a decision made at least in the United Kingdom, there had to be a decision made in the 1920s when radio became accessible to the public, the general public. So then suddenly you had this problem where it's like, okay, we're going to speak to, several tens of millions of people across the country over the airwaves. How do we do that? How are we going to sound? How should someone sound on the BBC? Right. So in the 1920s, they figured out that, okay, probably the best way to do this is to have an accent that most people have heard. And it's again, it comes down to accent bias and it comes down to familiarity with an accent. Like one end of the country is not going to find it easy to understand somebody from the other end of the country. So they had to go with something that was more non regional. So that a non-regional accent at the time in Britain was something called received pronunciation. Yes, it was
Please.
considered the acceptable way of speaking standard dialect of British English. So they went with that, and that became the standard. That became the hallmark, if you like, of British broadcasting throughout the United Kingdom, right up until the end of last century, when regional accents started to creep in again and became much more acceptable. The United States is a little further back in that process. They did start around the same time of broadcasting to people over the radio. And of course, the standard accent for Americans back then was quite different, and also Canadians too. They had this different version. It was somewhere between what we might now think of as, or we might now call general American, right? But it wasn't the general American that we now expect to hear in broadcasting in the United States, or general Canadian on the CBC. It was something that was more akin to being somewhere between British RP and something that was taught in the schools at the time. So, for example, you did have the R's and so on that you'd hear in certain words, but you'd also hear words like thought. And some people would say after as opposed and bath as opposed to after and bath. Harvard is a northeastern thing, so that's where you have more of something called it's called Boston. There's Boston Brahmin as well,
Yeah.
right? So which was percolated in the Northeast. But you had these kind of so-called upper class, and that's altered now a little bit. It's kind of settled down, but you still have this mythological kind of so-called general American accent that a lot of actors, especially voice actors, really want to emulate, and it's because they want their accent to be accessible by as many people as possible, because it doesn't have any regional features about it, which I think is very sad in a way, because it kind of dumbs things down a bit. It kind of gets rid of the color, the beauty of what accents are all about. But yeah, those so that was number one. Number one was practicality and being able to be accessible to as many millions of people at the same time as possible. And then number two was political hegemony of an empire. An empire needs to have a standard so that in order to subdue the people beneath you, you have to have them emulate the way that, you have to have those hierarchical differences. So people need to know their place. And this is the ugly part of it that we're still dealing with today. So it was kind of the two reasons behind why those so-called standards exist really and have proliferated.
Very, very fascinating. And I'm sure we could go deeper into the history of this. We won't right now. Let's go off to another digression here. Can you tell us something you learned recently that you realized only after teaching this?
Yeah, definitely. I guess one thing that I learned over the years is that, and this is quite important, is that native speakers, people who speak a particular language as their first language, are learners too. We are all of us are learners too, right? Because we tend to think of accent acquisition as stopping in childhood, right? I explained about how we start as soon as our ears are working before we even come out and see the light. But it doesn't stop in childhood. It continues throughout our lives. And, like I said, I've lived in different parts of the UK, and now I live in Canada for the past couple of decades. And I've noticed even in my own speech, certain things have shifted. Some shifted quite early and some took a bit of a while. It doesn't always go in the same direction. Sometimes it goes back in another direction, depending on who I'm talking to or whether I've been in the UK for a month or something. But it will shift a little bit. And it's not a deliberate thing either. It's it's something that I can control, right? I mean, if I'm acting in a role and I need to sound English, I need to know who this person is and where he's from and such and so forth. And I need to obviously control it. And of course, I tend to find though that sometimes it will happen if I release control. If I'm teaching someone in a classroom, if for example, I used to find that when I was teaching English as a second language, my accent would become more Canadian, and so I found myself talking with more of a Canadian accent. And then if I heard a recording, if I played it back, and I thought, why do I sound like that? And it was because my subconscious had somehow said, okay, you need to kind of be you need to be more of your Canadian self now because you're a Canadian teacher teaching Canadian English in this setting. But we adapt to the speech patterns that are around us. And I guess what I'm saying is that accent isn't fixed. It's adaptive and you can't stop it, right? Because the thing is, you might think, oh, well, I don't have different accents. I'm pretty fixed. But no, you're going to speak differently to one person compared to how you speak to another. You're going to speak to your mom in a different way compared to how you speak to your brother, your boss, your taxi driver, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
right? And this is something that we can become conscious of, and we can control that if we choose to do it.
And sometimes people call that code switching, right? I mean, the idea
Yes.
that, I mean, we do speak. I talk about this a lot with my English language learners. I'm going to call them learners, but I accept what you're saying. We are all learners.
We're all learners. Yeah.
But when I talk to them, I say it's always about context. Whether you're trying to understand a word, an idiom, a phrase, and also how you should speak, we do contextualize. There's even a relationship when we take it to a very large scale. How people speak is largely dependent and somewhat related to the environment in which it's spoken. We actually change not just our words and a few nuances, but it's sometimes even the nature of our speech. It can change. That is important to know because when people are saying, I can't change, I can't modify what I'm doing. I've been trying. This is my accent forever. I'm sorry. I apologize. Wait a minute. Hold on. Let's take a step back and really understand how this thing called speech, accent, and expression really works. Yeah. And
when somebody says that, though, when they say, I tried it and it didn't work, it's the same as when I hear actors say, oh, I can't do accents or I can't do accents, right?
yeah.
And it's like, well, what do you mean by that? Well, I tried. Like, how did you try? How did you try? How did you approach it? What did you do? How long did you spend doing it? And what do you think you can't do it? So this applies to anyone. Like when you say I can't do that, I mean, okay, there's going to be certain limits. It's like I can't jump off a building and fly, right? That's physically impossible. Or I can't fly a plane because I haven't gone through the training and I am not legally allowed or licensed to do so. However, you don't need a license in order to change the way you speak, right? All you need is to give yourself that license, and you need the time. Not everybody has that, right? That's a privilege that many of us don't have, right? You need to have that privilege of time, and you need to be able to want to do it as well. Like your motivation, because I think a lot of people will say, oh, yeah, I want to change my accent. And they're just kind of as if they're saying, yeah, I want to buy a new coat,
Yeah.
or I think I should wear red, or, get a new hairstyle. It's like, no, 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 no. This is like this, like I said before, it's a commitment, right? It's like, sure, you can do it, but, and it's definitely possible. It's definitely doable, but it requires that you have that motivation right? The motivation's got to be strong, and it's got to be really for you to reach that goal. That motivation has to be strong enough that you're thinking, that this is really what I want.
Yeah.
That this is part of my end game, right? So yes, you can, but if the motivation's there, you'll find a way.
Well, everybody, you heard it straight from the horse's mouth here. Yes, you can. Okay. Uh, but
Yeah, I'm thinking of the old Obama days. Yes, yes,
yes, we
yes, we
can. Yes,
can.
we
Yeah.
can. Oh, harken back to the good old days. Oh my God. We won't even go there right now. Okay. But and let's go to this really quickly because we had a little bit of time left. And we'll touch on some of these other issues later. We've scratched the surface on most of these topics. As you're talking about the amount of time, effort, energy, the motivation, the commitment needed, I also throw in that mix enjoyment. This is something that's part of the motivation. Part of the motivation for people engaging and socializing and learning and acquiring new ways of speaking is that they want to make friends and they want to have fun. And the other thing is that when we think about a long-term commitment, it doesn't have to be like you're in prison. I mean, it could be a beautiful marriage.
Exactly. You know what? I may be a coach, a teacher, a graphic designer, an actor, but one thing I am not is a salesperson. So I've not really been selling this whole thing very well. And you've touched on a really important point there is that learning should be fun. I've always said this because it's not like the day, like, I don't know. I think you probably went to school in the same century that I did. And most of the time, I found that learning it it was not fun. It was so boring in most cases. And you can remember the names of the teachers, but teacher that was the one that was like, oh my God, you can see the passion coming through.
Yeah.
And they taught things in such a fun and interesting way, rather than, okay, open your book to page 78, copy paragraph 3, you know? So the thing is, those of us who are old enough to remember those kinds of days will think that, oh my God, yeah, it's long, it's laborious, it's like studying for an exam that you've got to do. It really shouldn't be. And if it is, get yourself a new teacher or get yourself a new coach because it should be fun and like you said, there should be joy in it, joy that comes from the process, but also the joy that comes that a lot of us have lost when we became adults, and that is the joy of play, right?
Yeah.
This you might have a serious motivation for doing it and a serious goal to reach, but there's no reason why you should take these things so seriously that it's like there's no laughter or fun involved in this because you have to play. And part of learning is making mistakes. So that's another pet peeve of mine when people apologize for making what they consider to be an error.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, when we were kids growing up, we didn't apologize for falling over.
Right.
Because we couldn't walk properly.
That's how we learned.
Yeah, exactly. That's how you learn. So there's got to be play, there's got to be exploration, there's got to be questions because the answers to your questions, they're out there now, right? The internet, that is something I dreamed of as a kid, right? If I told my 8-year-old self about the realities of the World Wide Web, I'd be like, oh, I can't wait.
Are you kidding?
Right? Everything
available to me? Are you kidding me? Yeah. No, you're right.
It's like a big computer and all the answers are there. So, but I do warn people against AI because it won't give you, it's a great tool, very useful, but it won't give you all of the correct answers.
Yeah.
But again, that's another subject altogether. So yeah, like I say, just to summarize, it's like, it should be fun. It should be fun. And that, and even though, like you said, commitment, Often we think of commitment as being very solemn, but it shouldn't have to be. It should be like commitment in terms of holding yourself accountable and making sure you're following on with your dreams and making sure that you're on task, because a lot of people will lose focus, and usually that's a sign that your goal really wasn't something that you were committed to. But if you are, and it's fun, you keep doing it. And I
Well,
want to talk because I'm very ADHD. So
well, Mark, this has been very fun, very enjoyable, and I think also very insightful for me. I learned a lot as we were going through this and walking through some of your processes, and also understanding how you approach the concept of accents, and also understanding the various different dimensions by which we can look at accents, whether we look at it sociologically, historically, socially, economically, and even in terms of time and investment. There's a certain amount of economy associated with it. But there's so many different aspects we've addressed this, and I think we've still kind of scratched the surface, and hopefully we'll have more conversations.
yeah, exactly.
Anyway, thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate it. Any last closing remarks? Anything else you'd like to say before we finish out here and say until next time?
I guess really just, be true to yourself, really think about what it is that you want. And once you've decided upon that, stick to it and have fun doing it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. All right. Well, thank you very much, Mark. We're going to wrap it up here for another edition, or one of the first few editions of English Musings, Athar's English Musings. Don't forget to subscribe and like this channel. And also, I want to hear from you. I'd love to hear your comments, your ideas about how we can continue to improve the show as we go forward, and also topics that you'd like to cover. I'd love to hear from you. I look forward to more of these, and thank you very much. Like and subscribe. Bye for now.